your labor makes this city happen, but you live in a world that was created in order to suppress you. You live in a world that was created to make you feel like your labor and what you do is not important. However, you're the fulcrum on which everything rests.
Welcome back, dear listeners, to another episode of In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy. And any week in which Elon Musk faces humiliating public defeat is a good one in my book. How about you, Marcus?
Yeah, well, it certainly helps soften the blows of the rest of the week, Nora. Uh,
Yes.
in the billionaire versus billionaire legal fight between Elon Musk and Sam Altman, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict. Musk's suit was outside the statute of limitations. So basically, learn to count, bro. Learn to count.
I'm honestly surprised the jury didn't just decide that they're both guilty of like excessive crimes against humanity and, like crimes against taste and decency. Um,
Definitely in the code of public opinion, Nora.
Yeah,
Yes.
a unanimous, like, "From the depths of our collective souls, we hate you both" verdict is what I was looking for, but I guess this is better than nothing.
Yeah, gotta take these victories where they come, particularly in this economy, my God. But speaking of taking what you can get, Trump's DOJ just announced a $1.776 billion fund. Notice the number, very subtle,
Mhm.
to compensate people Trump says were brutally treated, quote unquote, by the justice system. And if you're
Right.
thinking that's black, brown, and you know, I don't know, maybe folks, women who have been terrorized by members of his administration, you'd be absolutely wrong. You'd be
Uh-huh.
absolutely wrong.
Yes, yes. He means instead people like his sons, his company, his
Yeah.
January 6th supporters who were pardoned by him.
Yeah.
So, basically an entire extended family of white grievance.
Yeah, and here's the beautiful part, if we want to call it that. Trump had a $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS over a tax return leak. He dropped it, and in exchange, the DOJ, which he controls because he is the president of the United States, created this fund. So essentially, he sued himself and then settled with himself, and it's the taxpayers who pay. So there you go.
Right.
There you go.
People are calling this a slush fund. I'm not sure that really does it justice. I think this is like self-service car wash for laundering dirty money. I think mafia bosses and privateers at this point are green with jealousy over the
Yeah.
kinds of shit that Trump comes up with.
Yeah, seriously, Captain Jack Sparrow couldn't have pulled this off. So, at least, I mean, my God, at least he had to steal the Black Pearl. He didn't just appoint himself harbor master and build the crown for his own ship. My God.
One legal expert this week put it simply, without clear public guidelines, quote, it's just kind of an open-ended slush fund. Claimants don't need to persuade a judge, they don't need to persuade a jury, they need to persuade a commission appointed by Trump, and probably composed of Trump's friends and family.
Yeah, it takes more time to send a Venmo request to your friends for beer money. And God, here's another rich detail. The fund closes December of 2028, 1 month before the next presidential inauguration. So any leftover money goes back to the government. So basically, hard incentives to pay off your friends before someone else takes over.
It really is like a going out of business sale, except we're selling off the last of our justice system for parts. And let's be honest, I mean, many people are pointing out that this is going to direct large amounts of basically free cash to some of the worst far right provocateurs that we have seen in our country in a very long time, essentially sending them to the insurgent supply store with daddy's credit card.
Yeah, no money for schools though, or anything else. But
That would be
whatever.
excessive, Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a couple of things worth noting. One, there are two police officers who were attacked on January 6th by the rioters who are actually suing to
Mhm.
stop this. That said, good luck in this environment. And then, you know, that there's just this grotesque white victimhood fund is coming at a time when discussions of reparations for, you know, slavery are basically dead in the water. They're deader than dead at this
Yes.
point. right?
Yes.
So,
We got rid of DEI, let alone reparations for
yeah.
um, it's also like I mean, I just keep thinking about how, like, so many young people were told that, like, student loan forgiveness was too much of a freebie under Biden, but, like, I guess at least, like, the QAnon shaman guy is now getting a lifetime supply of Viking hats. I'm so glad this is what we use our public funds for.
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, Nora, this was a step too far, even for the QAnon showman,
Oh
I
my
think.
god.
In an interview, he said it was an abuse of power by a would-be king and said, and I quote, "You think I'm going to take a fucking dime from Trump and the government after he's using this thing to cover up him and his family in perpetuity for all of their crimes? You think I'm going to take a dime of that blood money?"
Okay, first of all, didn't know he knew the word perpetuity, so props to him. The guy who raided Pelosi's office with a spear has more integrity than our president right now, like, it's just embarrassing.
People truly do contain multitudes, I guess. Yeah. And then, Nora, because this week hadn't been tainted enough by his gold embossed crimes, Trump also got the Justice Department to grant him forever immunity from tax audits. Forever. Like, meaning forever.
Nothing says innocence, Marcus, like needing to get forever immunity from your own government. I mean, it's basically the presidential equivalent of chanting like, "Na na 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 na, you can't touch me."
Yes. It's
Now,
exactly that.
if all this rapacious extortion and self-dealing has you feeling like the only option is to start sharpening your garden tools, which we don't recommend, our
Yes.
conversation this week is, I feel, like a cooling salve because in the face of a capitalism so all-consuming and so self-devouring that it seems we have no way out, what our conversation today reveals is that everyday people are building its alternatives every day right here in our communities.
Yeah, one of those people and our guest today is Mark Paschal, a worker owner of two cooperative restaurants in Seattle, Jude's and Rosette. Together with his fellow co-owners, Mark has shown that worker-owned establishments can work and even thrive by doubling down on an ethos of community, justice, and mutual aid.
Mark's providing a model for how other small businesses can build worker owned establishments that strengthen their communities and challenge the extractive economics of relentless growth that has shaped so much of Seattle and many other cities. And what's happening at Jude and Rosette doesn't just show what's possible, it's teaching all of us how we can dismantle capitalism one small decision, one shared meal at a time.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Just a note that we spoke with Mark while he was in the prep hour at his restaurant. So you may hear some authentic background noise. That is just the soundtrack of the working class, folks. Like we all know it well. Anyhow, here's our conversation with Mark Pescal. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. For our listeners who may not be familiar with worker-owned businesses, can you walk us through what that actually means in practice at Jude's? Like, just on a day-to-day level, like how is the experience of working there fundamentally different from working at a traditional restaurant?
Yeah, I can start by way of a little history. As a historian, that tends to be how I understand the world. I started at Jude's working here back in 2016 under the old owner. Um, it was a nice opportunity to get to know the South Side. We had just moved back to Seattle after being away for 20 years. So I got to experience South Seattle and work in South Seattle and really fall in love with this area of the city. Um, I was finishing a PhD, working on cocktails, doing all the things I could, raising some kids, still raising some kids. I left for 2019, and a bunch of regulars and old coworkers got in contact with me to let me know that Juice was for sale. It'd be cool if I could come back to the South Side. I was like, all right. So I talked to this guy I'd been working with. He was a vermouth importer. He lived in Rainier Beach, and he was like, all right, I think that we should do this. It could be a really fun experience. So we bought it January 2020, came in and changed the interior of it. We opened it with rental furniture, nothing on the walls other than paint, and work during the day, open at night. We didn't have money to just be closed for a long period of time. So we're like, all right, let's just make this happen. And COVID happens very soon afterwards. Like, okay, we knew it was always going to be something because it is always something in the restaurant industry, but this is a new type of something. Um, we made it through largely thanks to grants from the SBA, from other local organizations, which is really great. My business partner moved to Eastern Washington, so we had some disagreements about what opening during COVID would look like. I have nothing but good things to say about him. It was a really great experience working with him, but we just had different fundamental understandings of some things. So in January of 2021, we talked, and he's like, "Hey, I think maybe it's been a really fun experience, but maybe if you were to buy me out, and then you could have your a worker co-op or profit sharing or something like that." It's like, oh my god, I thought this was like 10 or 15 years away. I've never known how to run a business. This is not something I went to school for. I know how to make cocktails and I know how to make people feel welcome, but is there more to that in running a business? Sometimes, but largely no. Uh, 2 months later, presented the idea of becoming a worker co-op to the existing staff, most of whom had never heard of the concept before. Um, we decided, let's go for it. Let's see what happens. What's the worst thing that could happen? It's just another job and we get frustrated and leave, or maybe we can actually build something that's really cool and really fun and that doesn't exist anywhere in the area. So we started that. What that looked like was first learning a little bit about what worker co-ops were. So there's some reading materials that sent out so people could kind of get an understanding of what they were beginning to look at. We have $1,000 buy-in. It can typically comes out as 5% of a paycheck for however long that takes. Some people pay more. Some people, no one really pays less. That's not very much, but it can take a long time. It can take a short period of time. You have to have been here for 6 months so that we have seen what a working relationship looks like with you. There are some co-ops that take a year or 2 years before that you can buy in. Um, Back when we were first starting, it just seemed like 6 months is a good amount of time. We have monthly meetings where everyone on staff, whether you're a worker or not, are encouraged to come and participate. Even if you're not an owner, your labor still makes the restaurant happen. Without labor, there is no business. AI hasn't replaced that yet. Um, we have a Discord channel that some decision making takes place on, but we prefer to do actual decision making in person. So much of communication is nonverbal. If you lose the nuance and the ability to respond in ways that are kind and in ways that are understanding, if your only decision making happens online. So we really prioritize in person decision making. The meetings tend to be around 2 hours. We start by just checking in with everyone's general vibes. How are we all feeling? Then we go over all the financial numbers for the previous month and for the current time, and then relationship to historical numbers, how we did last year. So much of running a business is understanding what's happening in the business, like how are the financials looking, what's taking up the most amount of money, what's our cost, the returns on what we're buying, the cost of goods, are they matching what we're looking for? And then we go through whatever business. Anyone is able to propose a meeting agenda item. We take all of them seriously. We allot a certain amount of time. We have a timekeeper, so if things are getting close to going over, we can vote to extend time or decrease time. There's not a lot of things that are really contentious. If someone brings something up, it means that that's an important thing for that person. So we want to listen with intention and listen with understanding. How do we make the work experience, if this is important enough to bring up in a meeting, how do we listen and then see what we can do to pay attention to that and show that we're paying attention to that? We had a guy a couple of years ago who wanted to get rid of the mutual aid kitchen that cooks out of Jude's on Sundays so that he could do a Cajun brunch. So we're like, we really appreciate that you're bringing this to us, but that's kind of flies in the face of our mission statement on who we are. So that's not really going to be possible. We have other people who would say, I think that we should have non-alcoholic bitters. It doesn't add very much alcohol to a cocktail, but it is, as someone who's sober, as a bartender who's sober, it's really important that we look into this and make a change. So we're like, yeah, that's a fantastic thing. We wouldn't have necessarily attenuated to that without that person. So collectively, we listen, we try to understand what's driving the desire for change, and then we move on that if we all feel that's what we're going to do. It's consensus based. Uh, so it's not a traditional like representative democracy where you can have winners and losers. It's how do we make this work for everybody in the best way that we can? We have a set of bylaws that we wrote, and those bylaws are always open to change. Nothing is ever written in concrete. Everything is, if people feel this is important, then we're going to talk through it and we're going to discuss it, and we're going to see if, given the changing face of who is participating in the restaurant, all these things can always change. So that's kind of what it means to be a co-op, is that no one person gets to dominate how everything happens. There are different experience levels, of course, both at individual location and just in the industry, but that doesn't prioritize that person's voice. It just says this is historically why we've done things this way, and this is like how the industry tends to operate. And if we have a better way to do that, or a way that makes more sense to us, then we get to decide that. We don't have to run it up at HR or run it up the CEO or anything like that, or the owner. You'd be like, yeah, I'm a person who's here. This is my experience, and I think that we should be doing this. So let's see if we can make that, and let's institutionalize that change.
I love this so much, and, I think you're describing some really pragmatic and tactile ways that anarchy can actually be integrated into the workplace. I think a lot of people have misunderstandings about anarchy as like, "Oh, there's no rules. Everyone just does whatever they want," right? Um, I'm really interested in the ways that the ethos of your restaurant really foregrounds this vision of anarchy, but also a vision of mutual aid as kind of central to what you do. Why did it feel important to center those 2 pieces within a restaurant, which is not necessarily where we'd think of those showing up?
Yeah, I would say on the anarchy side of it, there are people who are socialists. There are people who wouldn't align politically necessarily with any of these things. There are people who find their political engagement happens more with sort of like indigenous liberation movements. Anarchy can take a lot of different forms, but the idea of building power is the important part. So for me and my journey, anarchy and mutual aid seem like a great response to a society that's falling apart. In a society in ascension, uh, communism seemed to make a lot of sense, but as I look around the world right now, I'm like, everything is falling apart. So how do you be there to build power at a level to not pick up the pieces, but stitch those pieces together into many overlapping networks and many overlapping webs? Um, Other people have different ideas, but building power is the important thing. The way that you do that is by being a presence in a community. I think community is a really weird term. I think we will probably talk more about that later on. But for us, community is the groups that we want to work with. It's the people we have responsibilities to. So there are several different communities that overlap at Jude's. There's also the people who live in the neighborhood who just want a nice place to eat and to drink, and that's a community we have to be responsible for as well. Some of those customers may turn into comrades in the future, but if they're always just people who find the experience of being here really great, then that's awesome too. We're in the business to make comrades, but we're also in the business to make people happy. We're in the business to make people's days better after they've been to Jude's than it was beforehand. And so sometimes that might turn into something more. Awesome. If it doesn't, that's also 100% fine. What people are looking for in the time that they have is different. Some people are looking for that. Some people have 3 kids, work 50 hours per week, and don't have the opportunity to be involved in almost anything else.
Yeah, Mark, I'm so glad you brought up about community and servicing the community. Particularly, we're at a point now where, particularly in the city, though it's playing out nationally, where you have corporations, whether it's Amazon or Starbucks. Here in the Northwest area, we had Boeing that threatened to move and then did move, right? If or at least their corporate headquarters, if they didn't get the tax breaks that they sought out. Can for the sort of average everyday person, can you talk about the difference in even prioritization, right, with worker owned co-ops such as Jude's, where it's like, we're here to also preserve the identity and character of this community. We're here to also provide a third place, right, for this community. As you were saying, that there are some neighbors who just want to go and eat and drink in a semi-affordable place, versus a corporation like a Starbucks or Amazon, where their bottom line is ultimately how much money can we make, and everything else is secondary, regardless of how many people we may or may not employ, regardless of the quality, right, of those jobs.
Yeah, I think when I first started working, family was really the terminology that was popular for businesses to use. Like, we're a family here. Like, even on the radio, if you're an idiot like me and listen to sports radio, you'll hear like, "Come in, we're a fam." You'll feel like family when you're here. That's always rung true. I've been very lucky that my parents, I feel like, are really incredible. But even within my larger extended family, there is child molestation, there's death, like the whole gamut of things that happen in every single family. It's touched upon. Um, you have families are the place where you learn authoritarianism from the time that you're born. Like, interrupting that is an important step in radical power and transformation. But saying you're a family is a really weird thing to do. Like, all right, so you're the patriarchal head of this family, and then we all come along and follow you, and we do what's best for the family, rather than it being a place of, sometimes it's a place of love, but it's not always felt like that. After 2020, I think you have this move for a lot of corporations to say, to look and see, oh, all the language that people online are using about life is now community based. That the family is not enough. The family could not withstand the onslaught of COVID, and the family structure couldn't survive the sort of like uprising that was happening. You had to have a larger social network than just a family. So corporations realize this, even if conservative politics wants to keep moving back to the family. Um, so you have all of a sudden all of the language that corporations use, either in branding and commercials, like Subaru or Toyota. It's like, oh, it's all about your community and how does this car help you and your community. And Starbucks and everyone, all their, the way they talk from top down, the way they talk from inward going outward to consumers, is all about, oh, our community of trust, and the ways that this community, like, we act as a community, um, round up at Safeway in order to donate this part to your community. Like, everything is based on community because of that. But it was very obvious that the family couldn't stand up to the test when it came to a crisis. Of course, it's all just corporate speak. It's a way to get consumers, and it's a way to get employees to be loyal to the brand. At a worker-owned co-op, I could never imagine saying that we're um, I would never describe ourselves as a community. I would never describe ourselves as a family or a co-op. That means our labor is what makes this happen. Like, us being together, us making decisions together, us working together creates the conditions for what we do to be possible in the first place. For a co-op, our mission is to provide good, high quality food, as affordable as we can be. You have to be able to afford your ideals, is one of the sayings in the food co-op, in the co-op restaurant movement. It's great to have ideals, but if you go out of business soon afterwards, then that doesn't really help anybody. um, Taking care of our customers, hospitality, showing, I think hospitality is innately anarchic. I think it innately is welcoming, and it innately creates relationships with people as server and as customer, and also as from customer to customer. I think that that's one of the fundamental differences between a co-op bar and like just any other bar, is that the needs of the worker largely set the tone for the relationship between customer and co-op, customer and worker. Um, if a woman who works at Jude says this person I feel is harassing me or is sort of like on that border, then it's our job as a co-op to make sure that that person doesn't have any power over that worker. So many restaurants use the ability of customer to dominate the relationship between their server or their bartender as a way to get customers to come back, to say like, here's a place where you have a little bit, customer's always right, like you get to say what happens in this relationship between the server and the customer. And that doesn't really work if you're at a co-op. Like you have to be able to afford your ideals, but you also have to be able to live your ideals. So all of the ways throughout history that we can think of uh, people being having their bodies used as a way to sell food, having their uh, who they are used as a way to sell food. It can be really gross and really disgusting, and a lot of harm has been done to millions of people who have been through this industry. We're obviously, as a co-op, we're paying you for your hospitality, but we're not paying for you to allow yourself to be dominated by a customer. If that happens, get the fuck out of here. We're not interested in your business. Um, I think on the whole, customers appreciate that. They appreciate knowing that here's a place where servers have boundaries, where bartenders have boundaries, and it can be uh, a really nice thing to be able to see boundaries actually existing in work relationships, to know that it's possible here, it can be possible elsewhere.
I really appreciate you saying that, especially as someone who's worked long hours in the restaurant industry before. Um, I wanted to ask you specifically about how your co-op model differs from other kinds of co-ops that people might be more familiar with, right? So REI calls itself a co-op. Our one of our local store chains here, PCC, calls itself a co-op. Yet both of those companies have been riled by worker complaints of union busting, of unfair working conditions. Workers at REI are currently striking and asking people to boycott the store. So, what do you think is a crucial difference between a sort of consumer co op like REI and a true worker owned cooperative like the one you have at Jude's?
With everything in life, it comes down to who has power. At a worker co-op, workers have the power. Like the the point of it is that this is the place where workers get to determine the conditions under which we work. At a consumer co-op, the consumer determines what happens. The board is elected by consumers. The board determines what happens. The relationship is not one where the people who make the industry or make the business move or go, they are not the primary stakeholders. So it, I think that in a world where worker owned co ops and unions are much stronger, and a world where democratic relationships between individuals and between groups of people are more primary, consumer co-ops are really fantastic, where people, I don't know, I think about like the small co-ops, grocery store co-ops that I was more familiar with before like the larger ones started really coming onto the scene. Like it would be consumers who spent time working at that co-op. So like in New York, there are like these co-ops. So like, if you want to be a member of this co-op, you have to work 3 hours per week, 4 hours per week, whatever, in order to participate in the co-op. When they get to be so big, like PCC or RAI, can't really run like that. Can't have someone who just comes in and is like, I'm working 3 hours, I'm putting this here, I'm putting that there. The labor of the co-op owners gets separated from the actual practice of the business. it becomes just spreadsheets. When you have like, I don't know how many members the REI has. It's got to have more than 1 million members. Like it's too far removed. The power structure is so broken. The power, I wouldn't say the power structure is broken. It's working really well for them. The removal of autonomy and the removal of decision making from the people who actually are the co-op participants breaks the whole thing apart, and it empowers people whose goal is to make more money and prioritize the return on profit and prioritize the circulation of capital. A co-op, a worker-owned co-op, can't really do that. And there are examples of very large co-ops that exist like that, and also federations of co-ops that exist like that that can show this is practicable. We'll see if we can do that in this country. But co-ops can be a really amazing way, both consumer co-ops and worker-owned co-ops. But in a consumer co-op, you still have the people who are involved, the people who are members have to be involved in the labor in some way.
You're probably aware a couple weeks ago, the founder of Starbucks, um, Howard Schultz, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, and he was talking about, essentially dunking on our great city of Seattle and talking about the business climate here. There's also been um, conversations from various media sources about how bad the business climate is, this and that, and I keep always wondering, like, what business specifically are they talking about? Because as I think this conversation has revealed, all businesses aren't created equal, and so I do wonder, and I would like to get your opinion on this, of like, how come there isn't more of a nuanced conversation, right, when it comes to you know business and commerce in cities, and how which one's best, if you will, benefit you know the cities, and are it invigorates cities as opposed to are simply just extractive, and why we don't have more of those conversations, right, in terms of, hey, is this business ultimately good for the city versus bad, and if and in a measurement of, like, is it taking more than it's actually giving, whether that's on a qualitative or quantitative level. And then number two, how do we make sure, like, that uh, businesses like co-ops are the ones that benefit from any type of policy or our political action.
First, shout out to Wemby. You brought up dunking and Howard Schultz in the same sentence, so immediately fuck Howard Schultz, go Sonics, forever.
Yes, always.
Um, I think if you can flatten discourse, then everyone can fit into. It's easy to make any particular business as for a net good. Seattle has, I think we have more millionaires per capita than any other city. Maybe San Francisco does, but I think there was like 3 years ago over 70,000 millionaires in the city of Seattle. It's like, okay, well, for as bad as Seattle must be from a business perspective, it seems there's a lot of people who enjoy being in business in Seattle. Part of that is just because it's such a flat conversation. It is a really hard thing to think about. How do you create the conditions for other types of narratives to come into being? Podcasts are great. There's a billion podcasts these days. So, how do you really make that into something? I think for us, visibility is really important. Being a restaurant is a more visible location for a co op than maybe a small tech firm that has like 3 or 4 employees and does something. Uh, there are some landscaping and maintenance companies that are worker owned, but again, that's on a much smaller, less visible scale. Jude's, we've been featured in the Seattle Times. Rosette, our other co-op, was in Sunset Magazine. Like, these things can be much larger. How do you get people to think about, well, is this business a net benefit to the broader city of Seattle, the broader region, the Pacific Northwest, and also to these small individual neighborhoods is a very different question, and it requires something that I don't entirely know how to do other than showing what co-op businesses can do for neighborhoods, showing that if you don't want to be an extractive business, if you want to become a place that people feel is necessary in the neighborhood, not just because it provides a better tax base, but because it provides a place for people to meet other people in the neighborhood, or provides a place for people to experience new ideas in a fairly comfortable way, and to go to a place that gives back to the community, to several different communities. I should say, not giving back to the community, but a place that gives back to several different communities. Co-ops can be a really useful and very visible means of doing that. Relying on the media is not going to do anything. Relying on Twitter or Instagram, those are also not really going to do these things. Those are tools that were not built for us. Those are tools that were built to separate us from power, that were built to separate us from Marxist terminology, the means of production.
You're saying the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house? Is that what I'm gathering?
I th- there's a lot of that. I think that the master's tools can be wielded in some ways against them, but you have to have already built other tools that can allow for that to actually happen. We hear people talk about like, oh, we need to fucking burn this whole system down. You're like, well, yeah, people have been trying that for 300 years. This is not like oh, I'm fed up, so we need to go about finally. It's this thing has finally showed us, like, people were firebombing Safeways and Bank of America back in the 70s. Like, it was a much more radical time in the late 60s, early 70s than even it was right now, as fed up as so many of us are. So you can't just like, well, fire is the most basic tool, so that's what we're going to use. That doesn't, they have fire suppression tools. Like, we have to develop the tools that we can to create power in our neighborhoods, to create power in the communities that we think are actively making the world more livable, that are creating, I don't know, it all comes down to power. Everything comes down to power. How do you build tools to create power at local levels, at regional levels, at national levels? The national level is so far away from anything that I can do, but I can be involved in a worker-owned co-op. I can support other worker-owned co-ops. And in that, I help build some means of local power. Everything is power. If there's
Yeah.
one thing that I can emphasize, like, it's all power. How do you build power? Worker co-ops are one tool that we have. There are lots of other tools available to us, though.
I mean, I think what I love about your model is it also is giving people an opportunity to experience in their everyday work life what that can actually look like and feel like and how it operates, right? Because so many of us have been so inculcated by capitalist societies that it's very hard for us to understand on a pragmatic basis what it actually looks like to live alternatives. And so I guess I want to follow up by asking you a question about um, sort of how the ethos of a restaurant co-op differs from so many of the ways that corporations currently make decisions in our society. Corporations obviously centralize decision making, but also shareholder corporations in particular are very much driven by uh, well, their decision making is very much driven by what produces growth, right? And that can be a um, sort of self-consuming reality for these corporations that everything is sacrificed to growth. And so other things like the value of the product, right, or the value of workers' labor often gets really subsumed by shareholder demands. So I guess I'm wondering, like, how can you help us understand how the co-op structure of Jude's changes the way that you make decisions about even stuff like what price an item is on the menu, right? Or who's getting a raise this year? Or how are we pricing the the wages of a dishwasher versus, front of restaurant staff. Can you kind of talk us through some of that?
Yeah, we um, first off, we all make the same wage at Jude's, front of house, back of house. Um, Prioritizing one group's labor over another group doesn't really make any practical sense. It's an easy way to keep some people out of sight, but some people don't want to. Some people love cooking and don't want to be customer facing, and that's not where they can best utilize who they are or the what they want to be doing. Other people, I can't imagine not being in front of people. Being in front of people is one of the great things. It energizes me. I'm an extrovert in that way, where it's to be with other people and to provide hospitality is one of the great joys of my life. That doesn't mean that I should get paid more. Like my labor is not more primary than the labor of anyone else. If the food sucks, people aren't going to come back, even if I have a sparkling personality. Um, so that's like the first thing. It's like you have to even that out. I think that that's hard because there's a world there's a degree to which bartenders are kind of like the upper um, the bourgeoisie of the restaurant industry. Star tenders is the term star tender exists for a reason. You have to have something of a magnetic personality. You have to be able to use your ability to provide hospitality in such a way that people feel engaged by that. And so that labor has often been more rewarded. It's like, well, we can always get another person to cook, but to get another person who can really center the front of house, that's the really important thing. Um, I don't think that that bears out in practice. It creates divisions within the restaurant, and it creates like, oh, well, yeah, their labor should be less. Or you think, oh, it would be great if the kitchen made as much as everyone else, but I also, due to how expensive this stupid city is, need to be making $50 an hour. Yeah, I understand that you need to be making a lot of money, but that means other people make significantly less money. So evening that out was the first step. You can't have class stru- within the structure of the restaurant. You can't have class differences. So that when you're making decisions about how much something costs, it's not just this is going to bring more income for the restaurant, but it's like, all right, how is this going to affect the back of house? How is it going to affect the front of house? Um, we just got a note that the ground beef that we have been using, Preservation Meat Collective, they're a really great group. It's just Washington, a little bit of Oregon, but they're like at every single step of the line, everything costs more. Labor costs more, gas costs more, storage costs more. So we have to raise the price of our ground beef. Ugh, it's not very fun because that means that we also will have to look at our cost of goods and what our margin is. And can we afford to keep our prices what they are? So that's a discussion that everyone that we'll probably have at our next general meeting to look and see like, all right, our cost of goods, our margin has been falling for the last 3 months. How do we address this? Like have we have to have a certain cost of goods, or we have to have a certain margin. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to make any profit. And if we don't make any profit, we can't pay each other, and we're going to go under. Like last year was the first year we made any money. We didn't make a lot of money, but that just allows us to have to buy new equipment and whatnot. So it's not like anyone's getting rich off of working in a restaurant anywhere these days, but especially at a co-op restaurant where we're sharing the resources equally. Um, in general, working at a co-op means we just have to discuss the things that we're doing collectively. There's no unilateral decision making. No one person's voice gets to be prioritized over everyone else's. And you can see the results of that in pay, in how we decide to do healthcare and how we decide to do these other things. They're collective decisions. They're based a little bit on what we can afford, but also based on we have to have these things in order for people to continue working with us.
Yeah, Mark, I wanted to ask you, you had brought up something earlier, sort of about, you know, essentially media or lack thereof around businesses like yours. And one of the things that I find is, as you brought up earlier, is like how much, particularly in American society, we're sort of propagandized, right, to believe in this notion of corporate culture and worker domination. And I can't tell you how many times I'm on Reddit, and I'm in an exchange with somebody, about better workers' rights and so forth. And it's, oh, do you know how lazy workers are, and yada yada yada. They don't need it, they don't deserve anything but the bare minimum, essentially. And so I guess I want to ask you, because I'm assuming that not everybody who is a co-owner in the business necessarily um, had read Ingalls or Marx before, or were or were super familiar. And so I'm just curious, how what have you seen in terms of sort of the awakening of folks, if you will, in terms of, oh yeah, we we don't have to have this very, it just be under the thumb of this only a capitalistic, style system of running a business. There are alternatives, right? I mean, as I forgot who said it, but there's that saying that it's easier to envision the end of the world than it is to envision the end of capitalism. And so, yeah, how have you seen sort of the epiphany that folks undergo, if you will, that have worked with Jews?
I I don't think that epiphany always happens. Um, there have we've had coworkers in the past who I think prefer to work in a place where it's stealing from the boss is easier. Or you're like, and we had a coworker who they would get drunk after they'd be hide drinks in the kitchen. This is a long time ago, back when we first started. Hide drinks in the kitchen and then make messes and come in at like 3 o'clock in the morning and just make themselves food and leave a mess and then blame the mutual aid kitchen for the mess. And it was easier for them. Like most of their relationship had kind of been built around that antagonistic relationship between boss and worker, and all the little ways that you make that as a worker you make that relationship tenable. So theft or um, slacking off or being lazy, or like all the things that workers get tarred with. You're like, well, there's a reason that why, if I'm making money for someone else but I'm not making money, very much money for myself, why do I need to go out of my way? Why should a worker, when working for a boss who doesn't see very much in the way of a return, why shouldn't they be lazy? Like there's a very long storied history of sabotage as being a way that people deal with shitty bosses. I think that workers don't often think about what they're doing as a form of sabotage, but all the small ways that people get through their day and work relationships that they hate, those things, if you start working at a co-op, they don't immediately go away. You have to learn, like, well, first off, these people aren't full of shit. Like, they actually do listen. It is part of it, but that may not be how you have always, like, you don't necessarily expect that. I think that as a worker you should be on your guard when you go into a new work experience and they tell you this one thing, but I don't know, is this just another way to exploit my labor and get more out of me, is always the first question that I think workers should ask about any situation. Like, oh, I have a socialist for a boss. Great. Are they trying to exploit my labor? How much say do I have in the conditions that I work in? Um, for people who do find that the co-op is what they want, though, they're like, I will never work. I will do everything in my power to make sure I never have another boss again. Like, this is the ability that I have to impact my work and have a say over my work is so much greater. I don't have a little tyrant. There are people who I work with in the kitchen who have had very well regarded chefs in the community who, like, community based restaurants, but the chefs, like, are total tyrants to the people in the back of house. The people who have had things thrown at them by people who are regarded as good people for the community. Like if you were to ask people who work in kitchens in like a Pliant Pool, like what are the actual good places to work? It would be a very different experience, a very different ranking of restaurants in town than you might expect. I would say I'm not going to name any names or anything like that. Um, so for people who experience this and say this is what I've been looking for, it's an incredible experience. I'm sorry, I feel like this is a bit of a rambling answer.
No, I think you're perfectly describing so much of the kind of, like, affect of being a worker in this time, which is so many people discovering that not only does work not love you back, but, like, it kinda hates you a lot of the time, and we bring that into our workplaces and all of these subtle, like, ways of resistance because what else are we supposed to do? So I really appreciate you saying that. Well, let's end on maybe a sort of a hopeful note. What do you want folks who are working at Amazon or Starbucks or McDonald's, large companies who really feel trapped in these systems that view them as disposable? What do you want them to know? What do you want them to know about the possibility of co-ops, or about how to work towards them in their own lives?
One of the most important things to realize is that we live in capitalist cities. The role of a capitalist city is to organize labor and to organize capital, to facilitate the smooth flow of capital and then to facilitate work. That's the primary reason that cities under capitalist societies exist. Our job is to remake those cities and to make those cities into places where mutual relationships and mutual thriving determine how the city looks. That goes into gentrification, that goes into where people work, that goes into how people work, what businesses are where they are. As an Amazon driver, you know this city as well as anybody else. Anyone in transportation, you know the ways that traffic works. You know the layout of the land really well. As a Starbucks employee, you have relationships with so many people. You have whether it's just a one-time relationship or whether it's like a multifaceted relationship. Like your labor makes this city happen, but you live in a world that was created in order to suppress you. You live in a world that was created to make you feel like your labor and what you do is not important. However, you're the fulcrum on which everything rests. Transportation is, given the world, just in time world that we live in capitalism, everyone can remember boat. Transportation is tremendously important. Getting people goods, people feel they need that. People have changed the way they have mailboxes now in order to prevent theft of their goods. Like there are so many ways that we have to choke uh, the movement of capital, choke the movement of labor, to remove our labor. To Those are the ways that we have to create power, and they can be scary. And being in a worker co-op is in many ways so much easier than trying to start a union or not going against a power structure that wants to grind you down. I've had friends who are assaulters who go into organizations in order to help create unions. It's a really important job. It's really dismal for a lot of people, and it really takes a lot out of you trying to do that. I've been involved in unions. I know that fight can be really hard, and the changing composition of the workforce, the ability of owners to remove people from workforces, those are always going to be things that stand in our way. But remembering, like, the city exists for something, and if we know that, how do we go about interrupting that? Uh, Most of the time, it's going to be by removing our labor in intentional ways. Sometimes it's by creating. I think that what has attracted me to worker co-ops is the idea of creating, like building something that starts from the premise that workers have power and then seeing what happens when we develop that. I think worker owned entities are in relationship with people struggling to form unions. I think there's most of the time there's going to be it's a really difficult fight to start a union, and it's an even more difficult fight to keep that union going on the principles of building power from below and creating the networks and connections, oh, interlocking networks to ensure that power continues to be built from below rather than starting to centralize and accruing from the top. Yeah, it's all about building the tools. And the tools are relational. Tools are, I think a lot of the Starbucks organizing has been really fantastic. A lot of the Amazon organizing has been really fantastic to illuminate who the people are and why they need power, appeals to others. At the end of the day, it's going to be a long and vicious struggle against these corporations. It feels like the entire world is sort of set up to destroy all the work that we want to do, because it is. Like, so we have to build a new world. We have to build a better world, and that's flow of what actually interrupting the flow of what the capitalist system wants to happen, while also building new things. So co-ops are the building part of it, and unions are the disrupting part of it, and they both work in tandem with each other. And co-ops should be supporting people in unions, because the work is twined and the work is essential.
Mark, just thank you so very much for your time today. Also, anybody who is in the Seattle area, please visit Jude's. It is one of
And
the
Rosette.
best restaurants. Yes, and Rosette, and Rosette. So you're not only supporting two great businesses, but you're getting some tasty beverages and food as well. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you not only for showing us an alternate way, but also for feeding us such good food.
Yes. This, for first we dine, then we unite. So
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I really appreciate the two of you and the work that you do on this podcast and the work you do outside
Thanks.
of this podcast. Always look forward to a new episode coming out. So thank you all so much.
Same. Well, glad you could be on this one. Thank you. Yeah, Nora, I gotta say, like, considering that this is also a week where Amazon chairman and founder Jeff Bezos, I would say, embarrassed himself on a CNBC interview where he
Wait, is
kind of
that, like, novel to us?
I suppose that is just the walking embodiment of embarrassment, I would say at this point. You're correct. But farther embarrassed, I guess, to be,
Okay.
for fact checking in real time. Um, but essentially, him saying that, he, if corporations, and I'm paraphrasing, but not too much, that if corporations sort of do their job, then essentially the federal government, doesn't have to, or what have you. And the fact that he said that you know, if he were able to double his taxes, it still wouldn't fix some of the things that we're facing as a nation. Well, one, I mean, he'd probably be right, because then he'd only maybe pay 2% in taxes. I think he
Yeah,
like only only in his average over the last year has been 1%. And then
yeah.
two,
Him and Elon Musk.
yes.
Yeah,
And then two, I mean, I think it just reveals a very I think this reveals kind of what Mark was saying, that this conversation around, businesses, it very much is flattened in the sense of, Jude's obviously, even though is technically a business, just like Amazon and Starbucks or Tesla, they have fundamentally different logics with how they approach what they do, meaning that you have a place in Jude's that fundamentally is about, trying to create and empower its community, trying to actually employ folks, trying to actually not just give them jobs, but give them living wages, trying to also give them, full health care and things of that
yeah,
nature, so that, the actual community can, as they say, can mutually thrive along with this community and city. Like, those are not considerations that a corporation like Amazon or Tesla or
yeah,
Starbucks has. Their consideration is singular, and it's that, how do we optimize and maximize profits at whatever cost?
yeah, yeah. It also reminds me of the conversation we had with Dean Spade earlier
Mm.
last year, where he was talking about how crucial it was for him to learn from these sort of like experiments in sort of autonomous government and mutual aid projects and cooperatives like the one that Mark is describing, because they're not just experiments in how to do things differently, but they're these like blueprints for how we unlearn so many of the ways that we have learned to be in relation with each other through like horribly extractive and authoritarian dynamics.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, it's just like a beautiful idea to take that and say, let's make a community restaurant with that
Mm,
dynamic. You know, like
yeah.
let's do this and also serve people delicious food.
Right, and I think the thing is, right, there's not one restaurant or one business, right, that is going to change these dynamics. This needs to be a part of, I will say, a structural change, right, in terms of what businesses, municipalities are actually like looking to assist in and give policy advantages to. It shouldn't, and tax abatement too, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be these multi-million dollar corporations that quite frankly can take care of themselves. It should be the Judes of the world.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, with that being said, Nora, shall we get into our 8 ounces of joy for this week?
Please let's.
All right. Yeah, I think I'll
You
go
should go
first.
first because
I'll
mine's
go.
petty. But
Okay.
I think we're
Well, hey,
alternating weeks of being
yeah, I
petty.
guess it's hey, there's a lot of pettiness to go around. I'll say, I guess I have 4 ounces in one place and 4 ounces in another to create eight. But and I know not everybody watches the show or even likes it, but the boys,
Oh my god, yeah.
oddly enough, it's also it's a show on Amazon Prime, but ironically enough. But anyway, they had their series final this week, and so spoiler alerts, for the next, couple seconds, I'm going to talk about it. So if you have not seen it and want to see it, just fast forward about 30 seconds on this podcast. That said, the thing about the series final that really stood out to me is that you had this guy Homelander who has been the show's antagonist, for the entirety of the 5 seasons of The Boys. To essentially this is this analog for Donald Trump and all these powerful, rich people, uh, in our country who, have ultimately this sort of this artificial power, right, that we've given to people. And once it is stripped away, and this is
Mhm.
what I think the series final is saying, once it's stripped away, what is actually left of these people? Most of the times, it's this very sniveling, whiny, insecure, narcissistic person who once all that power is stripped away, really is nothing. Their humanity has been eaten away, right? And yet these are the people we continue to elevate and lionize in our society. And, you know, the fact that these are the folks that we have lead us, I mean, we really truly need to question what their value is to our society and how ultimately these decisions that they make based on their own self-interest, based on their whole need to be uh, loved and valorized,
Yeah.
how that negatively impacts us all.
Yeah.
Uh, and then second, the 4 ounces to make up eight this week. The NAACP is calling for athletes to boycott, playing in states that are trying to roll back the Voting
Yes.
Rights Act as we speak. And
Yeah.
the only reason I gave this 4 ounces as opposed to eight is like, dude, where were you all like 10 or 15 years ago? I'm not
Yeah.
saying this is too little too late at all, but yeah, I do wish that this is something that, was discussed way before we got to this point. That said, hey, you got to start from somewhere. And so I'm glad that they're calling for this boycott. I do hope, particularly in certain states where sports are take an elevated position above all else and disproportionately so, I do hope that it is something that, does rattle the sensibilities of some of the folks who are in decision making power of these states, and they reverse course on what they're doing in terms of voter suppression. Am I
Mhm.
hopeful? I don't know, but I am glad that this is happening. I will say
Yeah.
that.
It was a really cool signal to, students who are being recruited, like, you have power, right?
Yeah,
And I think that's really cool, and I hope people pick it up and run with it.
I do too. So
Yeah.
I've been waiting with
Oh my
bated
god.
breath. Nora, what are your 8 ounces slash pettiness of this week?
Okay, well, mine is so petty that I might have to, like, do another one, but I don't know if we have time for it. So, for me, there is a singular joy
Mm.
in being right in a long-running fight with your partner. Um,
Go on. Go on.
so, basically, for the last year plus, my husband and I have had a daily disagreement over whether we are feeding our dog, who's a puppy, too much or too little food. And so, because she gets fed twice a day, it is 2 times a day that we have this fight, right? Like, where he says, "You're feeding her too much. She's gonna get fat." And I'm like, "Don't fat shame our dog. She's starving to death." And both of us have taken these, like, increasingly extreme positions on the feeding of our dog.
Mhm.
So, I definitely took the low road this week and decided that it was worth paying to go to the vet to get an answer to this question, and I'm very proud to announce that the vet said that we are absolutely underfeeding our dog, and she has been suffering and struggling, and our dog is also very excited with this outcome from the vet.
Sure.
Uh,
More
and not only did I get to come home and tell my husband this, but immediately he was like, "You're gonna rub this in for a really long time, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah."
That is well deserved. That is very well deserved, though, I must say. I must say.
No, but, like, my last petty one is, I was in Tacoma last week for a, like, future of healthcare symposium that I was speaking at,
Mm.
and the future of healthcare is, like, not so great right now, a little bit grim,
I
but
noticed.
yeah, and one of the things that we did was we kind of asked people, many of them healthcare workers, sort of, "As you're coming into the space, what are you carrying with you?" You know, like, "What's weighing on you?" And there was a lot, but over the course of this afternoon, I think we really got into this really beautiful dialogue about what gave us hope in that moment
Mm.
and really coming together across very different points of view and different positions within the healthcare field. Um, it was one of those kind of rare conferencey situations that actually feels deeply humane,
Mm.
and, like, people were really coming to into meaningful dialogue with each other across very different points of view on things like AI,
Yeah.
and some things that are really challenging us right now in healthcare, and, I'm just so grateful to have been in that space, and I've kind of been carrying the joy of that space and that interaction with me ever since. It was also super nice to be in Tacoma, which is, like, such a beautiful and underrated
Yeah.
city, um, and to have that conversation in that place, so
That's awesome. See, we gave bonus joy to folks today.
I
Like, that's
know.
just this is what happens, folks, when you support the show. We just, just sprinkle you.
We don't even require you to subscribe to get the extra joy.
There you go. There you go. I I'm glad, Nora, that you can carry at least, one of your joys this week on with you, for at least the next few months. I'd
Yeah, the
probably
petty
say.
one? Yeah, no,
Yes, absolutely.
I'm busy designing myself an "I was right" trophy to, like,
That's joy that
put
truly
on
keeps
the
on
kitchen
giving.
counter.
Well deserved. Well, shall we go ahead and cut out for
Oh
the
god,
day?
we'd better before I, like, talk myself into a marital grave. Alright. Well, folks, if you came into this episode feeling like the Republic was being auctioned off for parts, it is, it still is, but we hope we've reminded you that some people are also building the worlds that we want to co-own anyways.
Yeah, and while we are not yet co-owned by our listeners, we do run entirely on your support. And we're not just talking about you vibing with us in your earbuds. If you like what we do here, please head to inthemeanwhilepodcast.com to support the show with a donation or subscription. We guarantee that none of what you donate will go into $1 billion slush fund for a grieved white man. Just saying.
It's money well spent. Uh,
Yes.
Speaking of things worth supporting, this show is produced by the ever talented Jessica Partnow, and our music is by the equally talented Ham Aluo, both of whom deserve more credit than we give them and probably more money than we pay them.
Here, here. New episodes drop every Friday wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on KBRU Wednesdays at 5 p.m. You can also find us on YouTube, Instagram, and Blue Sky, at least until we find a way to dismantle big tech and turn it into a co-op.
Well, now you're talking, Marcus. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and definitely don't let the billionaires grind you down. We'll see you in the meanwhile.